prison in Iran, where many political prisoners are detained. Amnesty International has called on the United Nations Human Rights Council to launch an investigation into this attack and other acts of political violence by the regime so it can finally be held accountable for its attacks on its own citizens. And I call on the Australian government to support such action by the United Nations. It is high time this regime was made accountable, held accountable for its many crimes. There should be no excuses this time. I know there are claims made about cultural relativism and diversity and religious expression that suggest that we should not interfere. But freedom of religious expression ends the moment it attempts to coerce others and tell other people how they must behave. Violence and discrimination against women does not become less violent or less discriminatory because it is dressed up as religious conviction. And it's always striking that the restrictions based on alleged religious belief are always directed at women. You never see a rule that men must dress a certain way, that men can't go to school or university, that men can't drive a car, that men don't own property, that men can't go out in public or at night unless they're accompanied by a female chaperone. Nor can there be the excuse that we need to be on good terms with the Iranian regime for economic or trade reasons. I'd like $1 for every time I've heard a political or business leader, particularly those involved in foreign affairs or trade, say, we disagree with, for example, China's treatment of the Uyghurs or Japan over whaling or the treatment of cattle exported to Indonesia, but we mustn't let our differences get in the way of the relationship, as if it's somehow big and generous of us to set aside human rights, environmental or animal welfare concerns. What is really happening is the triumph of greed and corporate economic interests over human rights, and it shouldn't happen. Trade is not more important than human rights, and frankly, we shouldn't allow ourselves to be vulnerable to economic blackmail. We've seen this in Russia and Ukraine, where the dependence of European countries on Russian oil and gas has caused that war to drag on indefinitely at a terrible cost in innocent lives. Iran sells a lot of oil to the world, and collectively we should wean ourselves off it and become more self-sufficient. And if authoritarian countries like Russia and Iran want to engage in unholy alliances, then the democratic world is not incapable of defending itself. We've got no shortage of technology to replace oil and gas, solar and wind power, electric cars, batteries, and any number of climate and environmental reasons to do so. We should get on with it, become genuinely self-sufficient, and put human rights ahead of globalisation. I know the Australian and Western governments and members of Parliament would deep down welcome change in Iran. They know perfectly well what an ugly regime this is. But they think that won't happen, that it's impossible. So their default position is to try to get along with the regime and hope that it doesn't try to acquire nuclear weapons or engage in terrorist behaviour beyond its borders. We saw this with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action called the Iran Nuclear Deal in 2015. The first problem with this is that the Iranian regime is not genuinely committed to such an outcome. I had the good fortune to attend the 2017 Free Iran Conference in Paris, organised by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And you probably know that the Iranian regime was implicated in a plot to explode a bomb at the 2018 Free Iran Conference, which was also in Paris. It is a terrorist regime. And in any event, a policy of appeasing the regime for example, by declaring the PMOI or the MAK to be terrorist organisations without any evidence, as happened in Australia for many years, simply makes the view that things will never change in Iran a self-fulfilling prophecy. It condemns Iran's young people, and young women in particular, to a life without freedom or hope. I salute the courage of the protesters, their bravery in standing in the streets, knowing that they are at risk of being killed or detained indefinitely, is quite remarkable. It is astonishing. They are entitled to our support. And I support the call by the National Council of Resistance leader Maryam Rajavi for a democratic, peaceful, secular, non-nuclear Iranian republic. Iran, like all the nations,
I would just like to clarify something. As Iranians, we have solidarity with any people, but not with groups such as like the PMOI, who have done horrible things. We are sorry. We did not know he was going to say that. We want to clarify we are sorry. None of those groups should be accepted by Iranians. We don't need these parties to help us. We are Iranian people. We have our own voice. Down with Islamic Republic of Iran.
Down with Islamic Republic of Iran.
Down with Islamic Republic. Down with Islamic Republic. Now, for our next speaker, we're going to have an Iranian-Australian barrister coming to speak. Say her name! Say her name! Say her name! Women like freedom! 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 Zan zindagi azadi! Zan zindagi azadi! Zan zindagi azadi! Zan zindagi azadi! Thank you, everyone. For our next speaker, we'll have an Iranian-Australian barrister, Tagir, who will come and talk to us about the actions we can take with the Australian government. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Khamenei, Akbar Khamenei,
Akbar Khamenei, Akbar Khamenei.
My Iranian friends, can I have a moment, please? I know we are all excited, but it's important to listen. Can we firstly pay tribute and congratulate this team of youth these Iranian women.
But they gave him the speech. They don't know he's not.
The Iranian women and youth who are leading the protest today, can we please give them a round of applause? It's reflective of the bravery of the Iranian women and girls and youth in Iran who are standing up to the regime. The Islamic Republic regime. Say your name for me one more time. A 22-year-old woman taken by the Islamic Republic regime and returned to her family dead. We are infuriated by her death, but let us not be fooled. What barbaric or archaic or draconian law that she broke does not matter. The fact is, she was taken. And that is where we draw the line. Hadis Najafi, 22 and young, she was taken. Nika Shakarami, Sarina Ismailzadeh, 16, singing and full of life, they were taken. Since Massa, more than 300 people officially have been killed, including schoolgirls and schoolboys standing up for an ideal. 5,000 people arrested. And if that is not enough, Elnaz Rekabi, Iranian Olympic athlete, competing thousands of miles away in South Korea. She revealed her hair and climbed that wall high like a hero. So insecure and so threatened by her bravery, the Islamic regime reached across the ocean and she was taken. So we all know why we are here. We want change. Not reform, change, real change. Regime change. Because a generation of Iranian women and girls and youth and their allies have arisen and they have said enough is enough. They are standing up and fighting for their ideal and what they believe. Woman, life, freedom. Repeat it. Woman, life, freedom.
Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom.
Thank you. And this is where we address you, our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. And our Foreign Minister, Senator Penny Wong, this is where we address you. We thank you for your words of support and we welcome your condemnation of the Islamic Republic regime and their brutal crackdown on the protesters, on the unarmed protesters. But as Dr. Kylie Moore-Gilbert has said, Dr. Kylie Moore-Gilbert, who was hostage of the regime for more than 2 years and knows the mentality of the Islamic regime we're dealing with, she has said platitudes are not enough. Words of support and solidarity and condemnation are simply not enough. We need action, real action. And we are all united in what action is necessary. Ministers and officials of the entirety of the Islamic Republic regime, their associates and their families should be banned from exploiting Australia. Their assets should be frozen. They should be prevented from conducting any business or trade with Australia. They should not be able to conduct business in Australia. They should not be able to come to, remaining or live in Australia. These people, these perpetrators, they should not be able to enjoy the liberties of a free society when they support a system and a regime which violently and lethally deprives Iranian women and their allies of those same rights. That is what we mean when we say we want effective sanctions against the entirety of the Islamic Republic regime. And we don't mean we mean the entirety of the regime, not just a handpick of officials who are already sanctioned. We mean the entirety of the regime. Any minister or official associated with that regime should feel the sanctions and not be welcome in Australia. And this is not just about standing up to their hypocrisy. This is about supporting the unarmed protesters who are striving and are struggling for woman life freedom. My Prime Minister and my Foreign Minister, this is about Australia being consistent with their national policy to end violence against women. This is about Australia firmly upholding its position that with action and not just words, that supporting violence against women anywhere in the world is unacceptable, and Australia says no. So we are united, we are together, and with one voice we say to impose sanctions on the entirety of the Islamic Republic regime and impose those sanctions now to assist those unarmed protesters.